one of the reasons we are able to be confused about diet is because our bodies are so remarkably tolerant. We are natively omnivorous, and we are incredibly forgiving machines for a while. But everybody still eats, and most of us do it badly. And so diet is the leading cause of premature death in the United States today. Well, the single leading predictor variable of chronic disease and all-cause mortality, as we discussed at the start, is diet quality. That deserves to be a vital sign. We need to know that in everybody. It's too important to neglect. Do we measure it routinely? We do not, because we did not historically have the tools to do it.
Welcome, friends. We truly have a special treat in store for you today. A one-on-one with the esteemed Dr. David L. Katz. Dr. Katz is a preventive medicine specialist and globally recognized authority on lifestyle medicine. He's the founding director of Yale University's Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center, past president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, president and founder of the True Health Initiative, and founder and CEO of Diet ID. At last count, Dr. Katz holds a staggering 180 awards, recognitions, organizations, appointments, and honors. He put much of his work aside in 2020 to help with COVID, serving on the front line as a volunteer and speaking before the U.S. Senate in May. Whether you're a practitioner or simply interested in cutting through all the diet confusion, I think you're really going to enjoy this. Welcome, Dr. Katz. It is just so good to be with you again today. But we talk about a lot of things, but in class I always talk about what are the leading causes of diseases. But I think you've done a great job of raising up something that we all tend to forget about. And so I'll ask you right off the top, what's the number one cause of early death in America?
Poor diet. And first of all, Scott, thanks. It's great to be back with you as well. And, you know, it's sort of stunning that something we control, something we produce, something that we interact with every day, every one of us, something we expose our children to, could be the leading cause of premature death in our country, even during the pandemic, by the way. But it is. Diet is number one. When I started my career in preventive medicine, I finished my training in preventive medicine, public health in 1993. And that was the year the paper came out in the Journal of the American Medical Association that positioned diet among the top 3 causes of premature death in the country. The paper was entitled Actual Causes of Death in the United States. It was by Mike McGinnis and Bill Foege. Famous paper, I think one of the most important papers in the modern literature. Those findings have been replicated many times since. But back in 1993, so almost 3 decades ago, tobacco was number 1, diet was number 2, lack of physical activity was number 3. And those 3 factors together, but by themselves, accounted for 80% of the premature deaths that occur in this country every year. It's incredible. 80% of the premature deaths in chronic disease would go away if we just fixed what we were doing badly with our feet, our forks, and our fingers. Feet, forks, and fingers, master levers of medical destiny. Flash forward to the current era, and you know, we've obviously had strides reducing tobacco exposure in the United States. It's still way too high, but it's much better than it was 3 decades ago. But everybody still eats, and most of us do it badly. And so diet is the leading cause of premature death in the United States today. And a good place to get more information about that is an op-ed that was in the New York Times August 26th of last year, 2019, entitled "Our Food is Killing Too Many of Us." It was by Dariush Mozaffarian, Dean of Nutrition at Tufts, and Dan Glickman, former Secretary of Agriculture of the United States. And they cite the primary literature establishing poor diet quality as the number 1 cause of chronic disease and premature death. And then they go on to talk about what we ought to do to fix it. And I imagine we'll do the same.
Yeah, you with your colleagues, and I'm sure I know mine, we all have been talking about the issues with diet and how it relates to disease for a long time. And as we look in, we're here in 2020, and while as difficult it is, COVID is teaching us a lot of things, and I think it hopefully is creating some new opportunities. But I think what many of us would suggest is that it's really, you know, this has been building for about the last 50 years or so, and in terms of an underlying issue that no one really wanted to recognize, and COVID really has just pulled the trigger on that. Is that Is that fair to say, do you think?
Not only is it fair to say, but really in two ways. So, in one sense, it pulled the trigger at the very origin of the pandemic because it's food sourcing that caused this pandemic. But then the other issue, and I think this is really more what you're referring to, Scott, we already had these slow motion pandemics of chronic disease that we've been neglecting. So we have pandemic type 2 diabetes, we have pandemic obesity, we have pandemic hypertension, we have pandemic coronary artery disease, all of which is preventable. And all of that represents a chronic liability. Yeah, those siphon years from lives and life from years all the time, but they do it in slow motion. I can't warn you about getting type 2 diabetes in 5 minutes or next week. You get it over years and decades. And so, everybody's pretty blasé about it. Coronary disease develops over years and decades. Cancer develops over years and decades. People don't want to get that stuff, but that stuff does not trigger the fight or flight response. COVID does. COVID basically took all of those chronic liabilities and set them on fire. Basically said, no, they're acute liabilities now. If you have obesity, you are at greater risk of getting severely ill with this infection and dying from it. If you have type 2 diabetes, greater risk of severe infection and death. If you have hypertension, greater risk of severe infection and death. Coronary disease, same thing. So everything that was a chronic liability anyway is now also an acute liability. So the death toll from COVID in the United States is partly attributable to, ineptitude in how we've managed the pandemic here. We've done a terrible job, but also partly attributable to the very poor state of chronic health in the country to begin with. Colleagues and I have done a couple papers during the pandemic looking at the distribution of chronic diseases in the population that put us at higher risk for bad COVID outcomes. 60% or more of adults in the United States have at least one of the major risk factors for COVID. 60%, it's incredible. And 40% or more of us have two or more of the major risk factors. So a huge percentage of the population is at elevated risk, not necessary. So yeah, I think COVID basically says everything that was a chronic liability is an acute threat now too.
Yeah, and so the one thing is we talk about that. I did a little bit of research into how are our oldest folks really around the world doing, ones we know as the blue zones, who have always kind of been the champions of sustained health, right? And low incidence of, or at least deferred incidence of chronic disease. They have, I wouldn't say sailed through, but relative to much younger communities, they have been largely untouched, which to me would be a very clear message of this is clearly manageable and we could be addressing this far differently on an individual basis as well.
I read that, I shared that, and I thank you for answering the question. I didn't answer the question, but I thought to ask it in the early going because, for example, when we were waiting for COVID to hit us in the United States, but looking aghast at what was happening in northern Italy, it was pretty clear that this was devastating for people over 70 and 80. And it was devastating for people with severe chronic disease, which is less common in Italy than here, but not exactly rare. But I wondered, I wonder how this would play out in the blue zones where 80 is like 60 everywhere else, and where you have to be 100 to be like an 80-year-old elsewhere in the world. So I wonder if in the blue zones the cut point for severe COVID infection isn't 80, it's 95 or 100 or 102. So I thought to ask the question, but I didn't have the answer. I appreciate that you pulled together the answer, and it's pretty much what I expected. So sure, old age puts you at risk because generally old people in our society are sick. There are very few people in our society, a vanishingly small percentage of the population, who are over 80 and in robust good health. And very few who are over 70 in robust good health. I mean, if 60% of all adults have one or more major chronic disease, and if our risk for chronic disease goes up as we age, you quickly get into the realm of a rounding error for the number of people over 80 who are free of major chronic disease. So here in the US, in northern Italy, and much of the world, being old generally means being sick and frail, but not so in the blue zones, where again, until your health starts to look like a typical 80-year-old elsewhere in the world, you need to be 105. And your answer was exactly what I was expecting to see. So yeah, age, we're mortal. We all die. Even blue zonians eventually die. They just do it better and they do it later. So age will always be a risk factor for severe infection because our immune system weakens as we age. But at what point you cross the line into the realm of real vulnerability varies with your native health. And in the blue zones, it clearly doesn't happen at 70, and it doesn't seem to happen at 80, and it may not happen until 100.
So how would you get to live that lifestyle? And it really says in any of the work I do is I kind of figure I could get almost any reasonable, healthy 50-year-old to 90 without doing anything clever at all, right? Because our work in genetics says really up until 95, genetics has very little to do with it. So we kind of say diet is really the number one cause of early death. Then it begs the question, well, what diet? Right. So I've heard you talk about this. So I'll just say, what's the best diet?
So I've wrestled with this more than most people through multiple editions of a nutrition textbook. We're working our way through the fourth edition of Nutrition and Clinical Practice right now, through many of my other books, and a review article commissioned by Annual Review of Public Health in 2014. Can we say what diet is best for health? So I've made identifying best diet a career-long crusade before I ever turned it into a business. And the answer is the basic theme is perfectly clear. Michael Pollan characterized it in 7 words: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's pretty darn good. And that's the reason why, everybody remembers it and repeats it. But if you expand that, the basic theme of optimal eating for Homo sapiens is real food direct from nature. So not highly processed glow in the dark Frankenfood or so-called ultra processed food on the Nova scale. We eat way too much of that. And by the way, I think it's worth noting, Scott, one of the reasons we are able to be confused about diet is because our bodies are so remarkably tolerant. We are natively omnivorous, and we are incredibly forgiving machines for a while. So, if you're a giant panda, you have to eat bamboo. If you are a koala bear, you have to eat eucalyptus leaves. You have a very narrow adaptation range. We Homo sapiens have this remarkably broad adaptation range where you can put damn near anything in the tank and run for a while. I mean, think of a machine where you could throw anything in the tank and it would run. I mean, how incredible that would be. So you have a car, you put gasoline, it'll go. You put marshmallows, it'll go. You put cheese puffs, it'll go. I mean, it's incredible. We are that incredible. We really are. But it takes a toll. And the toll is a massive, unnecessary burden of chronic disease and premature death. But the toll happens in slow motion. You can run on marshmallows for a while. You can run on jelly beans for a while. You can run on Coca-Cola and cheese doodles. So that's why people are confused, because, hey, I ate cheese doodles today and nothing but cheese doodles, and I'm still fine. I'm still standing. Well, yeah, for a while. But if what we're talking about is the value proposition of more years in life, more life in years, the combination of longevity and vitality, resistance to all those chronic diseases that prey on people, the optimal diet for that is real food, not too much, mostly plants, a diet that is mostly made up of minimally or unprocessed fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts and seeds, plain water when thirsty. And then in addition to that, less of anything else. Can you append fish to that? Sure, then it's an optimal pescatarian diet. Can you append some meat and poultry and fish and dairy and eggs to that? Sure, then it's an optimal flexitarian diet. Can you append a little bit of meat, a bit more fish, maybe a little bit of poultry, a little bit of fermented dairy and occasional eggs, plus some wine to that? Sure, then it's a Mediterranean diet. Can you do that diet higher or lower in fat? Absolutely. It could be Asian style and low in fat, or Loma Linda style, or it could be Mediterranean style with a lot of extra virgin olive oil and high in fat. Good either way. Could it be higher or lower in carbohydrate? Sure. Can it be any one of many ethnic variants from all around the world? Absolutely, yes. The basic theme is perfectly clear. A wide variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts and seeds, plain water, preferentially when thirsty. Get that right, and you're fine. And then everything else around that makes a lesser contribution. It can be vegan, it can be vegetarian, it can be flexitarian, it can be more of a mixed diet. The theme is clear. When we get into the realm of, is there just one decisively best diet? In general, I'm obligated to say for human health, no. We really don't know whether an optimal vegan diet is better or worse for long-term health outcomes than an optimal Mediterranean diet or an optimal pescatarian diet. I would quickly append, though, Scott, there are three things I care about. I care about human health. I'm a physician for that reason. I care about the fate of the planet because I live here, and so do my children, and so does everybody I know, and I don't have another planet to call home, so I care about Earth. And I care about other creatures. I have dogs who are my best friends. There's one right behind me on my chair. I care about my horse, Troubadour. In general, I think biodiversity on this planet is its greatest treasure. So I care about how we treat our fellow creatures. If you look through those three windows, those three lenses, human health outcomes, impacts on the planet, and how we treat our fellow creatures, a plant-exclusive diet wins. So there's a strong argument for the vegan variants, whole food plant-based variants, on the theme of optimal eating, if you want to address not just human health, but human health, planetary health, and our fellow creatures. But again, a Mediterranean diet, which is in that general direction without going all the way, is also really, really good. So the theme is clear. There is no one obvious variant that is the decisive winner.
Yeah, it's and we all see way too much energy getting spent on someone trying to convince
My
the
diet
world
can
that,
beat your diet, right? And everything you heard up until yesterday was wrong. And I have a renegade hypothesis today, and buy my book. Yeah, right. Way too much of that nonsense.
so yeah, and I think I applaud you every day about kind of, and that's where I try to be. Let's find some middle road that makes sense. It's not about trying to wave the flag, any particular flag. It's just listen to the data, and when you hear enough of it, there's some consistent themes we can start to get behind it.
Absolutely. And by the way, Scott, to be clear, so I founded the True Health Initiative to prove to myself and then demonstrate to the world that leading experts in diet, nutrition, public health, preventive medicine, functional medicine, integrative medicine, lifestyle, holistic care, everything, environmental impact, culinary arts, agreed. And they agreed about the optimal theme, whether they favored paleo or vegan or Mediterranean or flexitarian or pescatarian or DASH, that essentially the fundamentals that unify were more important than the small details that separate. But all we ever talk about in the media is the small details that separate. So the True Health Initiative, which is a 501c3 I created years ago, has a global council of directors, roughly 500 world leading experts from 45 countries, paleo to vegan and everything in between, coming together to say what we just said. We agree. And the common ground is what matters most. And I think the public deserves to know that there's massive expert consensus around the entire globe about the fundamental science and sense of Homo sapiens eating well.
Yeah, I think if that's, and I'll put the link into True Health Initiative of things you've done in your career, and you've done some great things. That for me is just like when I look at who's on that list and how diverse it is, and those are some people I look to as people I really respect. That's just I think a tremendous assembly of diverse, but without exception, all really talented people. So thank you for that again, because you probably think that's old hat, but everybody's getting introduced to that, somebody new every day or multiple people every day, I'm sure.
Thank you.
So you've obviously been studying diet your whole career in terms of all the influences on it. And so you probably, even though I'm assuming you haven't been a diet coach, are keenly aware of the challenges with people trying to make diet improvements, right? Everybody at some point in their life has tried to make some effort at improving my diet. We struggle with, and I asked people in my class, what do you think of your diet? How do you eat? And 9 times out of 10, most people say pretty well.
Right. That's the typical answer. Yeah. And so it
tells us almost nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So we're trying to figure out how to get from here to there, and
we don't know
with where there is, but where is here?
Where is here? Exactly. So I actually have been a diet coach. I did clinical medicine for 30 years, and as a preventive medicine specialist, I did primary care, internal medicine. I took care of everything. I had patients in the ICU and all of that. But people came to me preferentially for advice about health promotion, disease prevention, and we talked an awful lot about diet. So I coached innumerable patients over 30 years about their diet. and was always frustrated with exactly that same thing. I could send them for a 90-minute food frequency questionnaire, or ask them to write down everything they've eaten for the past week, or have them do an extensive consultation with a dietitian who helps them record all of their dietary intake. But by and large, I had no clear idea what they were eating. They told lies to themselves, little white lies. I mean, everybody, just like everybody thinks they're taller than they are and weighs less, everybody thinks they eat better than they do. So people tell little white lies to themselves, and they tell little white lies to their physician and health professional. So, there was all sorts of distortion. People also routinely substitute the name of a thing for the composition of a thing. So, you'd hear, well, I eat a salad. I don't understand why I'm not thin and healthy. Well, tell me about your salad. Well, it's a chef salad. There's ham and cheese and bologna and croutons and blue cheese dressing. Is there any lettuce in the salad? Well, not very much. Okay, well, I think we understand the problem. But, what you get is I eat salad for lunch. So yes, absolutely, huge problem. So we don't tend to know where people are starting. We don't know where here is. And that's been a rate limiting problem for me as a clinician, a rate limiting problem for me as a nutrition researcher, a rate limiting problem for me as I consult to industry, and a real frustration for many years. There's an expression, Scott, from the world of business we all know: we don't tend to manage what we don't reliably measure. And it's certainly true in medicine. And in fact, in medicine, we epitomize that with vital signs. The things that are critically important to health, the things that are vital, we measure them all the time. And in fact, we are derelict in our professional duties if we don't routinely measure heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, temperature. They are vital. Got to know what they are. Well, the single leading predictor variable of chronic disease and all-cause mortality, as we discussed at the start, is diet quality. That deserves to be a vital sign. We need to know that in everybody. It's too important to neglect. Do we measure it routinely? We do not, because we did not historically have the tools to do it.
Well, thank you very much, David. Great to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Stay well, my friend.
You too. Take care, David.